The relationship between Kenya Moore and Mark Daly has always been filled with drama, but the truth behind their situation might be messier than anyone ever imagined. Kenya had been saying for a while that she wanted a divorce, but the way things played out, it seemed like she was holding on to something deeper. Rumors have been swirling about Kenya and Mark's situation, and it looks like some of those rumors might actually be true. There were whispers that, despite filing for divorce in 2021, Kenya and Mark were still very much connected. And in fact, some fans believe that Mark may have been living with Kenya this whole time, but what really went down between them? Let's break it down and take a deeper look at what was really happening behind the scenes. It turns out that Mark Daly's life wasn't as put together as it seemed on the outside. For years, he was seen as a successful businessman with a restaurant and a growing presence in the media. However, reality painted a much different picture. Mark's financial troubles were piling up, and it all came to a head when he got evicted from his apartment in New York. Legal papers revealed that Mark had stopped paying rent for several months, and by the time the landlord took legal action, he owed almost $100,000 in back rent. A lot of money for anyone, but especially for someone who had built a career off of being successful. This wasn't just a small oversight. Mark had let his financial situation spiral out of control. Around the same time, fans noticed something different about Kenya Moore on The Real Housewives of Atlanta. She seemed quieter, calmer, and less involved in the drama that she had once been at the center of. Some thought it was just a sign of her growing maturity, but others began to wonder if it was because she knew about Mark's issues and was trying to keep them under wraps. Maybe Kenya didn't want the world to know just how bad things were getting for Mark. She was always very careful about her private life, so it makes sense that she would want to keep Mark's financial struggles a secret. If Mark had been living with her during this time, she wouldn't want that information to leak out, especially when it could potentially harm her own image. But the problems didn't stop there. In July 2024, a new lawsuit came to light, revealing that Mark wasn't just behind on his rent, but also on his business expenses. Mark's restaurant, which had been his pride and joy, had fallen into serious financial trouble. He had failed to pay for 2 business spaces in Brooklyn, and the landlord claimed he had stopped making payments as early as 2022. While Mark was acting like everything was fine, behind the scenes, his debts were continuing to grow. This was a man who once seemed to have it all: his own restaurant, a family, and a career in the public eye. But now he was struggling to keep a roof over his head. Around this time, Kenya had already filed for divorce, but the divorce never went through. It's clear that Kenya and Mark's relationship was more complicated than just signing divorce papers. Mark may have been losing everything, but Kenya never made a big public spectacle about it. Instead, she continued to focus on her own career and personal life. However, some fans began to question whether Kenya was quietly helping Mark. After all, she had the resources to do so. Fans began to wonder, was Kenya keeping Mark afloat behind the scenes? After all, there were no signs of drama between them, no public confrontations, and no major accusations. Instead, Kenya kept her peace and continued to show up to events, acting as if everything was normal. Then, a strange thing happened. Mark started appearing in a new city, dressed in expensive clothes, flying around, and living a life that seemed inconsistent with his financial troubles. It was as if he was pretending everything was fine, even though his life was falling apart. At one point, rumors started circulating that Mark had even landed a new job, one that was connected to someone Kenya had worked with in the past. Was this just a coincidence, or was it possible that Kenya had helped him get the job? Considering her connections and resources, it wouldn't be surprising if she helped him find a way to get back on his feet. It seems like Kenya may have been doing what she could behind the scenes to make sure Mark didn't completely fall apart. What's even more interesting is that people close to both of them have hinted that Kenya did indeed step in to help. Sources suggest that Kenya made sure that Mark, the father of her child, was taken care of, whether that meant helping with his bills, offering him a place to stay, or simply making sure he didn't hit rock bottom. It's possible that Kenya was doing all of this not because she wanted to get back with Mark, but because of their shared history and the responsibility they still felt toward their daughter, Brooklyn. Kenya had always been protective of her private life, and if she was helping Mark, she would certainly want to keep that quiet. She wasn't the type to air her personal business out in public, so any support she gave him would have been done in private. But even Kenya couldn't hide all the stress. When people asked about Mark or his restaurant, Kenya's answers seemed to get a little tight. Her smile would falter, and she would pause before answering, as if trying to protect herself from revealing too much. This wasn't just media training, it was a woman trying to protect her peace while also holding back the truth. Kenya was always careful with her words, and her cryptic comments about second chances and going through hard times made it clear that she was subtly addressing her situation. With Mark, even if she wasn't saying it outright, it's important to note that legally, Kenya didn't owe Mark anything. They were no longer married, and their relationship was supposed to be over. However, the emotional ties were still there. They had a child together, and their history couldn't just be erased with a divorce decree. Walking away wasn't as simple as signing papers. It's possible that Kenya didn't want to see Mark fail completely. She might have thought that helping him stay afloat was the best thing for their daughter, to ensure that Brooklyn wouldn't have to see her father struggle. And maybe, just maybe, Kenya still cared about Mark. Not in a romantic way, but in the way that someone who had shared a life with him would.